Hello everyone and welcome to FiST Chat, the podcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern, and we're returning back to our tried and true, I should say, topics of the week: Windows, Apple, Google, all those things, because it's been big news in the last week or so regarding a lot of that stuff, so it should be an interesting thing to cover.
It certainly will, Ben, and hello FiST Chat fans. Yes, it's been a big week, and you're right about old topics, but they're never going to go away, are they? They're the whole reason we're here.
Well, not as long as they keep making big splashy announcements at any rate. So before we get into that, don't forget our website, www.fistchat.com. You can get all our links there. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, interact with us as well. You can catch all of our back episodes on YouTube, Vimeo and Digicosm TV. And you can subscribe to our audio via iTunes, RSS and FeedBurner, and make sure to check out our blogs. And just on the topic of blogs, I thought just mention there was quite an interesting reaction to an article that I wrote last week for Bit Rebels about how Apple, whether they were or not, whether they were trying to rain on the Windows 8 parade by launching a whole bunch of new products 3 days before Microsoft launched the Windows 8, and it's just an interesting reaction if you give some suggestion that you're not inclined in one particular technological circle over another or something. You'll stir up the fanboy interest. So very interesting to say the least, but I'll just want to say for the record that I wouldn't classify myself as a fanboy at all, because fanboys are sort of unapologetic and they sort of look over any flaws that a company will have, and they all have them, and even though I'm all on Apple hardware, and that's pretty much predominantly where I am, I still got a foot in the Microsoft world as well because I run Windows. But doesn't matter if they start putting out crap, and it's possible that they can. I'll be changing pretty quickly to whatever's the better alternative. So, what do you think about that, Steve? Do you think that's all fair and above board?
I'm going to hold you to that, Ben. I can't wait for the day that what wasn't iOS 6 enough for you to rip out that ecosystem and install a new one?
Maybe not quite yet.
I think in some ways that's actually what we're talking about today, really, with the launch of these new products, and possibly, really ultimately where they're going.
Yeah.
There's not really a lot of choice left, and we've covered this before. And it was interesting to see, from my perspective, people complain about Windows 8 being too different and therefore too difficult to use.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think? Because I believe you've installed it.
Yeah, I've installed a copy on my MacBook Pro, so that was probably the best one to put it on, because that's got a touch interface with a trackpad, and you absolutely need to have some sort of touch-based interface in order to work with it, because you can do it with a mouse and keyboard, but it's just a lot more clumsy doing it that way. For me, I thought the initial run, I thought it was pretty good. The desktop's still there, so that still works the same way as it did before. You got your Metro apps and all of that that's in there, but the only real thing that I thought was annoying was that instead of 2 clicks to shut down the computer, it takes 4 or 5 now, because you have to click back to the Metro interface, and I can't remember exactly the procedure, but there was a couple of extra steps involved, and that seemed a bit odd. I thought they should have just had at least one button somewhere that you just clicked it and it shut down.
I think there's a little bit of remember when Mac first brought out OS 10, and it was a real departure from OS 9, which was a fantastic system, the classic system. And they tried to shake it up, and they did shake it up. OS 10's a great platform, but they tried to change it just that little bit too much. Possibly what Windows have done with the new 8.
Yeah.
And but it didn't take them long. By the time they brought out 1.2 or whatever it was, or 10.2 or 10.1.1 probably,
yeah,
they'd already started to get past some of those bugs. what I'm interested in is like, it seems to me that Microsoft have actually had a genuine attempt at a ubiquitous cloud-based platform that'll work on any device. And
Yeah.
is that what it is, and will it work?
Well, I think in theory that's the idea, that it doesn't matter which device you pick up, it's going to have the same interface. But that they have been muddling the message that they've been sending out, because tablets with Windows 8 don't actually have Windows 8 technically on them. They've got Windows RT, which works apparently almost exactly the same. It looks the same,
yeah,
but it's not the same, and you can't do certain things with it, and it's
because you have to buy an app then to do those certain things.
Possibly, yes, but I think this is where, if we bring the Apple event in here as an example, I think this is where Apple really sort of has it over Microsoft in terms of, it doesn't necessarily mean they've got the better stuff. They just know how to sell it properly and get that message across.
Well, they definitely do. I mean, you know, Apple's moved on a long way from, you know, having somebody buy the first copy of an operating system and going woohoo in the store. Like, although they did push the boundaries with that opening of the Spanish store.
But the thing is, they had another one that they had another video at the head. I don't know if this is going to be a recurring thing. You know, seeing the fanboys high-fiving the store staff. I don't know. I didn't even pay attention. As soon as I saw it, I just pressed fast forward on the.
But this is something else. This starting it as a trend now. They have to go so hard on the launch, because as soon as one of these products are launched now, social media takes over, and if the message is strong enough, it'll override any corporation or any company marketing message.
Yeah, and I think and Apple's definitely more on top of that than what Microsoft is, and I think
Apple's got more fanboys to carry their message, you know, and to overlook any flaws. You know, hey, I can't find where I'm going anymore, but gee, my phone looks fantastic.
Exactly, and I mean, from what I've read, like Microsoft would have like these multiple thousand-word blogs that they would write about what they were doing with Windows 8. Who's going to sit down and read all of that? And that's where it gets lost. And I just don't understand why they have this problem.
The other thing that I'm really interested in with Windows 8 is that is it really signaling the death knell of personal computing? I mean, is it going to a point where we're just going to get apps, cloud-based interface, where effectively we won't own any of the software, we just have a screen, ads will be pushed through, personalised to me through the app I'm using, and all my files will be located in the cloud? Is that where it's headed?
It's certainly looking that way. At the moment, it's okay because you've still got a little bit of movement in terms of what you can do with it. There's still local storage on the devices and such.
Access to raw files?
Yeah, and that sort of thing. Well, I guess in OS 10 and Windows, you've still got that.
Yeah.
But this is what you were saying before. Maybe this, I mean, I've got into trouble this week with a few of the Google Android fanboys for because I'm not a fan of Android at all. It does nothing for me, but maybe that's going to be the platform for the people that want that open source type of experience where they can go in, modify it however they like, and just do whatever they want with it.
That's a really interesting point, because it's quite obvious that Microsoft are trying to emulate Apple's model with the online store, the apps direct, and taking away the directory structures and the access to raw files, whereas Google still allows that open source and that little bit of freedom, which I think is very interesting, because while I'm not against platforms like the iPad currently is, which is a pure consumer platform. It's not highly creative. It's really about selecting an app and using that app for enjoyment rather than some sort of creative process. But if all computing goes that way, then I think that'll be a very sad day. Yeah.
No, definitely, because you have to be able to have that ability to move and manipulate your files and whatever else. And I can't imagine being in a version of OS 10 where you wouldn't know where your files are. because they're sort of linked to the apps you're using.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of strange that way. That the only issue I think, like say with the Android model, is that there's a lot of fragmentation with the software, and there's multiple versions running everywhere. And that's the one thing where they sort of have to pick up, because even though it's a closed system with Apple, and it's becoming a closed system with Microsoft, they're delivering that sort of streamlined experience that just works. That's what they're going for, and they're thinking that is more important than having the ability to chop and change and do whatever you want with the system itself.
Well, but it's a very fine line, and I think we'll get onto this in a bit with, in the last year, Google, Microsoft and Facebook have all spoken out about sort of the dumbing down, at an education level of understanding computers. Well, if they're only going to give us access to a consumer-based platform, what's the point? Like, what exactly are you going to be taught in the classroom that's going to give you any sort of idea about how a computer works?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, just before we move on to our news bites, because time's getting away from us here, but do you have any thoughts about what was launched at the Apple event? Since we had the Windows 8 thing, what about the Apple event? The iPad mini wasn't really a surprise. I think the 4th gen iPad was a surprise that sort of took people by, they didn't expect that, even though it's not really much of a bump. The only thing that really interested me was the new iMac, because they made it just by the way it looked, and it reinforced my belief that I won't be upgrading because it doesn't have half the stuff on it that it did before.
Well, I mean, look, I'm really, you were talking about like leaving behind, products and suppliers that don't do it for you. Apple was starting to push me pretty close to the margin. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
I love my iPhone and iPad because they're easy to use and they work, but they're really like taking away all the things I loved about my desktop and laptops. Yeah. And if they're not careful, I mean, if I can only buy an Apple external hard drive and whatever else, and only use them in the way that Apple tells me I can use them, then there's not much left, is there?
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to clarify too, in terms of what I was saying at the outset about what I wrote last week, was that right now, I think like all of my computing needs are being satisfied by the Apple hardware. But the thing, like with the iMac, the fact that they've removed old technology before, like floppy disk drives and whatever. Yeah. Now they've gone the optical drive, and that's clearly where they're taking all of that out. But it's the reduction in the ports. It's that lack of flexibility. Yeah. I like the fact that there's multiple sort of options. You got your FireWire and USB and whatever else in the older iMacs, but that's starting to go away. Eventually they'll just have one port in the back, probably a Thunderbolt port.
Yeah, which will be okay if you can connect it to a number of devices. Now, optical drives, no doubt about it, they're old hat, but you've got to give a person a choice to use one.
That's right.
I don't need my iMac to be any thinner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it doesn't need to do that, and especially from the front, it doesn't look any different.
No. So anyway, I think that they're the big issues now, and I think that we'll hit a point. We're coming to it now, and I think there'll be a lot of kickback because we'll either all end up on Google or Microsoft or Apple will have to supply a device that allows people to do what they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we'll move on to our news bites now, and this was an interesting film one. Microsoft hired a former top CBS television executive named Nancy Tellem to oversee production of original video content for the company's Xbox video game console, which is interesting. That kind of... I mean, if that is that kind of like delivering content via the internet. You could almost imagine that happening in the future. You take away the idea of seeing things on TV or in the cinema or whatever. You just deliver it through one of their devices, and then all of a sudden, what are they going to become the new Hollywood?
Well, it's an interesting thing because there's one thing we all know about Xbox is a certain demographic.
Yeah.
So whether or not they're just going to do things like Jackass straight through the, Xbox Legion, maybe that's why you would hire a television person to do something like that. It just talks to me. It just says demographic, and I imagine they'll be creating content for that particular demographic.
Okay.
Probably UFC or World Championship Wrestling or something like that. I don't know.
Interesting to say the least. Okay, we'll move on to our science news bite, and this one's sort of a good news thing. Microsoft and Facebook are teaming up for a special project, and this is basically to help the UK government recruit and train a new generation of computer science teachers, because apparently in the UK, and probably in other places too, computer science is lacking, and most of the teachers don't even know the basics around operating a computer, which is a little bit of a concern.
Hey, Steve Jobs only gave us one button. What else is there to it?
Apparently a little bit more. Apparently Eric Schmidt from Google was warning last year that the UK was throwing away their computer heritage, and this was when he found out that computer science wasn't a standard taught in most of their schools. So regardless of what you think of computers, the kids really need to be taught about them, because the whole world is going to be operating on them, and it is operating on them.
Well, but that's my point though. If you're going to take away like the ability to explore and actually do things with computers, if you're only going to supply people with apps they purchase and use, then really you're not helping the situation.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we'll move on to our last news by the technology one, and well, actually, this is sort of links back into what we were talking about before. One of the other announcements was the Microsoft Surface tablet computer, which is obviously going to be pitched as a challenger to the iPad. Interesting in the sense that they took it one step further and included a keyboard as part of the cover, and you could stand it up so that it sort of fits a laptop type looking device. This might be one of those hit or miss things where, it's either going to do what they think it is, and that it's going to successfully blend the laptop and tablet experience, or it's not going to work at all, in the sense that it's not going to do one or the other that good. If you talk to, if you listen to Steve Ballmer and I think it's Steven Sinofsky, who's under Windows, that they're pitching that, it's going to do both really well. Then if you listen to Tim Cook and Phil Schiller over at the Apple side, they're basically saying that it's like putting a toast and a refrigerator together and expecting to get, both of them to work properly at the same time. So, well,
it's an interesting thing, Ben, because I'd say that for the Microsoft Surface tablet, is it better than the AirBook? Because that's the standard. The AirBook is a tablet with a keyboard attached.
Yeah, the MacBook Air, yeah.
Yeah, MacBook Air, yeah. If it's so, I haven't seen it. I'd like to have a play with it, but if it's not lighter, if it's not slimmer, and if it's not as easy to use with as good a screen, it's a miss. And a big one.
All right, we're totally out of time. So thanks again, Steve, for the chat.
Tweet us, FiST Chat fans. Let's hear what you think about the new operating system.
Absolutely. Now, just to let you know, too, we're going to be off next week because I'll be off in Shanghai next week. So as much as we'd like to do another one while I'm there, I don't think I'll be able to squeeze it in. But I'll be back the week after that, and we can sort of go over all of that sort of thing when we get back. Maybe a few more videos, hopefully, of some tech markets or something if we get the time while we're over there.
Very good.
Cool. So that's the end of this week's episode, so we'll catch you next week.